Childhood for many of us was a time where we had very little worries. We would take life as it comes, only being concerned about things that directly affected us. Innocence can be associated with being pure, good, and uncorrupted, but today I would like to look at the aspect of naivety. With the significant developments in social media and the internet over the past decade, we are bombarded with more and more information on a daily basis. But is becoming increasingly aware of the world around us a detriment to personal happiness? Author John Jakes once said, "The pain comes from knowing that we have never been safe, and therefore will never be safe again. It comes from knowing we can never be so ignorant again. It comes from knowing we can never be children again. Losing innocence, remembering heaven, that was the essence of hell." My name is Myles Dyer, it is Wednesday, October 26th, and you are listening to Podcast 376. Well, some of you may know of a man named Richard Dawkins. He is a biologist, a world-famous atheist actually, and I've been watching so many of his videos on YouTube the past couple of days in which he debates a lot with creationists. And it's just really fascinating to watch because the main point I really see is a battle between someone who has an emergent mindset, who's always willing to update based on research, against people who live on tradition. And there seems to be a clash of rationale where he will ask very valid questions. And unfortunately, the religious are unable to give credible answers. That's not necessarily to say that they are wrong. You know, we all have different opinions on spirituality. But the thing it really touched on for me was the aspect of people wanting to live in comfort, you know, knowing that there is a loving God out there, knowing there is life after death, these sort of things. But I don't want to go too much into religion. I want to talk about the aspect of feeling comfort and innocence. You know, innocence is something we associate with childhood. And throughout life, we are exposed to more and more stimuli and experiences in which we perhaps lose our innocence because we realise and begin to understand the world more and more. And where you may be a child who believes, you know, everything is nice and happy, you grow up to realise that there is a lot of bad in the world as well. I think a trivial but true example is when I was a kid and, you know, used to think of the doctors or going to the hospital, you would have this naive assumption that, you know, you go to the doctors or to the hospital and everything will be better because they are a doctor or a nurse. You know, that is what they do and therefore they are good at it. But as you grow up, you start to realise that they are human beings too, and there's something called human error, and there can be complications, and it's not quite like what I first thought when I was a child. I don't know if any of you have any experiences of your own like that. But this podcast is quite personal to me because in the past year, 2 years, I have really had a huge sense of losing my innocence in the fact that I have intensively started researching about the economics of the world, the politics of the world. I've always been wary of it, but to really look into it deeply. And being curious about the world has never been something that's happened recently. I've always been that sort of person. When I was in secondary school, I stood up in my final year at a public speaking competition, and I did a 9-minute speech when you're supposed to only have 4 or 5, in which I took the school rules and I explained how the school was a corrupt system. It was a private school. You paid for the education. And there were cases where people were dealing drugs and they weren't dealt with because their family paid a significant amount of money to the school. There were people who bullied others and for the same reasons were kept there, but the people that were bullied left. But before I did the speech, I wanted to make sure it was the right thing to do and I wasn't going to lose out because my mother is someone who is very protective. She's a mother after all, and has always said the rhetoric to me, don't step out of line too often or you will end up worse. She didn't say it exactly like that, but that's kind of the feeling I got. And, I understand that, something I learned later on in life is if you put everyone else first, you put yourself last. So it's about finding a balance, because you do need to take care of yourself before you take care of other people. But anyway, I was in sixth form, and a week or two before the public speaking competition, I went to meet the head of year, and I gave him my speech written out to read so he could check it. And after reading it, he made it quite clear that he didn't want me reading it at this competition. He told me that I shouldn't be questioning authority like that, and it would be a shame to end my year on such a bad note. I went ahead and did the speech anyway. It was the first public speaking competition the headmaster didn't turn up to because he was informed in advance. And it was incredible because they wanted to suspend me for it, but so many teachers agreed with what I said. And it was for that reason that I remained a pupil till the end of my final year. So from that sort of age of 17 and 18, I was always questioning. But the last 2 years definitely got much more intense. I joined a movement called the Zeitgeist Movement. Some of you may have heard of the Zeitgeist movies. There are 3 movies out. The first one I was a fan of in the sense that it really makes you begin to question. In terms of the material itself, I'm questionable about different aspects. It's very conspiracy theory-esque. But the second and third movies are fantastic, addendum and moving forward. And when I started intensively looking into the economic situation of the world and the patterns and the trends, I got quite depressed, because it dawned on me that things are going to get a lot worse in the world. So at the end of 2010, I did a 3-part video on my YouTube channel where I literally blurted out to the camera my concerns. And some people thought I was passionate and on point, whilst others thought I was hysterical. But after that point, I did get very depressed. And I'd wake up at 4 a.m. thinking, I need to do something. So I'd go online and do a live show where I spoke with people. And this year we have seen the start of the Occupy movements worldwide. We are seeing the global economic crisis just get worse and worse. We see mainstream media trying to keep the status quo. So I was not sure if I was going to do it with an American accent or British accent then. And I went with American status. And the government are being ignorant into listening to what the people want. But how does this relate to Innocence? I remember when I used to be able to just play on a computer game for hours on end. Or when I was a kid, I used to go for bike rides or go for walks. When I used to enjoy writing stories, painting, and all these sort of creative things. When I used to go out for a drink with friends quite often and just talk about just random stuff. But over the years, and actually even since sixth form, I've become a much more intense person. I've got more and more intense over the years, and I can't do that anymore. I finish work, I get home, I start looking into activism, I start trying to find ways that we can help the world more. The past 5 years I've been doing videos on YouTube, that's been my main goal. Sure, I do comedy from time to time, but I guess that is my break. But in the past year, comedy on my channel was been even rarer. And the thing with Innocence, like the quote I gave at the beginning of this podcast, is once you've lost it, you can't get it back. Once you are aware of things in the world, you can't unlearn it, so to speak. You can live in denial, which can be done, I suppose, but if you want to live a sort of a free life and sort of take the path as it comes, you don't unlearn stuff. And it's scary to me because I guess I don't want to lose my mind, and you can always learn more. But when I speak to people who do want to stay in their bubble, I always make the same point that surely it's better to know what problems are coming your way so you can prepare for it. So I could give a really trivial example. It's not trivial, it's quite tragic actually. You could live in the middle of a forest and there could be a forest fire in the distance that is coming closer and closer. Now, you could have built a watchtower and gone to the top of it so you get warning if anything is coming your way. But if you're someone who would rather not worry about it, you're not giving yourself as much warning to prepare for things that will make life much harder for you. And I just feel that knowing truth is the best way to be, because once you've learnt to deal with truth, you can become a much stronger person, a much happier person. And surely it's better to have happiness and confidence based on truth than it is to deceive yourself. But that's a question I'm going to put out there now. Do you know anyone who would much rather live in a bubble? Maybe that is you. And if so, why? Is knowing truth detrimental to happiness? Because I'd like to take it a step further and wonder if people wanting to live in a bubble is why there is so much apathy, especially in the Western world today. If you think of the Occupy protests, there are lots of people who believe in what the protesters stand for, but they're not becoming active. Or if you think of the political process, there are lots of people who just don't bother voting. It's this complacency. Is that related to naivety and innocence and staying in your own bubble, just assuming the world is going to be okay if you just leave it to others? Because surely it's when you leave it to others and you don't take responsibility for knowing the truth about the world that others can take advantage of that and corruption can occur. I mean, I could talk about my Universal Solutions project, which is about educating the world and allowing everyone to have access to evidence and research for dealing with all problems in society with real solutions. And by having a global population educated, there is a reduction in corruption and a reduction in uncertainty. Let's take the HARP machine, for example. Some of you may not know of it. I mean, please do research it. But just to explain it now, it's in Alaska and is a base that contains a series of radio transmitters. Now, if you think of a laser which concentrates light particles, this does it with radio waves. And military research papers that have been released have shown it can affect the weather and also be used for mind control. Now, this sounds crazy, and because this project is so classified in many other areas, there are conspiracy theorists. Now, conspiracy theories arise when there is unknown, when there is a lack of information. If we made more information readily available, if there was less ignorance, if people were less naive, then conspiracy theories would be reduced because people wouldn't need to speculate. But that may be going on to something else. But I guess I could give one final example, which is when I went into counselling 4 years ago after my first love ruined my life pretty much. I waited 21 years for the right person and it messed me up incredibly. And there was a lot of other things happening in my life as well, which built on top of that, and I got extremely depressed. But that, I think, is because I was naive about relationships or naive about the situation. I mean, when we get depressed in life, when we feel sad about an event that's happened, all we're really saying is our expectation wasn't met. And again, I think that does come down to naivety. I came out that situation a lot stronger, with a much bigger worldview, maybe a bit more cautious, not necessarily cynical about relationships, but it made me wiser to it. So I go back to this question, is knowing truth detrimental to happiness? Because perhaps it is in the short run, but in the long run it makes us prepared and makes us happier for the long run, because we don't set these expectations too high when we do experience conflictions in life. So I'm sorry this was quite a long podcast. I'm also very, very tired. So hopefully this podcast was coherent. As always, you can contact me at Podcast376 on Twitter, facebook.com/Podcast376. You can check this out on iTunes and on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Podcast376. Is knowing truth detrimental to happiness? I'd like to hear your stories of innocence and naivety. Thanks so much for listening, and I will see you soon on another Podcast 376.